Good morning. I'm Leanne Breger. I'm the Programs Director at iMove. It gives me great pleasure to welcome you all to today's webinar. In the spirit of reconciliation, we acknowledge the traditional custodians of the land throughout Australia and their connections to land, sea, and community. We pay our respects to elders past and present and extend that respect to all Aboriginal and Torres Strait Islander peoples here today. A note on housekeeping for the session. Please submit questions via the Q&A at the bottom of your screen. People can ask questions verbally if they would like by raising your hand, and that will get your mic deactivated. Oh, activated, I should say. I'm delighted to introduce today's panelists. Tim Reid is the Project Manager for Future Mobility at Transport for New South Wales. Greg Hannon is the Head of Network Strategy and Non-Network Solutions at City Power and PowerCore. Ruchika Diora is the Program Director at C4Net. Dr. Ali Muradi Amani is a Research Fellow at RMIT University. And Dr. Mahdi Jalili is an Associate Professor, RMIT University. It's become evident in the collaborations that iMove facilitates that electricity and transport are inextricably linked. The interconnection between these two sectors will form the basis of what powers transport into the future. The Conductor Series initiative, which brings together transport industry through iMove, the energy industry through C4Net, and research through RMIT, will look to discuss and solve challenges that occur as we move towards the mass electrification of transport. I'd like to hand over to our first speaker, Tim, who'll give us a transport strategy perspective on the electrification of transport. Tim, over to you.
Thank you very much. I'm just arranging some slides. Let's see. Can everyone see those okay? Perfect. Thank you. So I've been asked today to come and speak to academics and experts in the field about energy and transport. That's obviously not intimidating at all. I've come from Transport for New South Wales. I'm in a team called Future Mobility, and we focus on the up and coming transport opportunities and things that the government should be aware of and considering. I'm sure a lot of you have met many other members of my team. Within the team, we look at electrification of public transport, connected and autonomous vehicles, including, you may have seen recently, a tender for a fully autonomous full-size electric bus. There's also a future mobility research and testing centre in Cadal, which tests a lot of new ADAS functionality and also provides the Australasian ANCAP ratings. Before getting started, I'd also like to pay my respects to the traditional custodians, elders past and present, and recognise and celebrate the diversity of Aboriginal peoples and their ongoing cultures and connections to the lands and waters of New South Wales. I'm just going to see if I can get my notes up, because they've gone. But so the decarbonisation of transport, I can't see my notes, so you're going to have to bear with me. So transport and energy have been linked since the beginning of transport, and they need each other. You can't move things without energy. Until now, fossil fuels have been that dominant form of energy, and I think we've come to broad agreement now that that's an unsustainable option. The benefits of transitioning to decarbonisation: we can generate our energy locally. And by doing so, that can eliminate as well a lot of shipping requirements and emissions. Don't quote me on this, but I've heard that global shipping could be reduced by 50% if renewable energy can be locally generated. So transitioning for our energy needs and for our transport needs to locally generated renewables could have significant effects both locally and globally. So what is happening globally? A lot of nations and some states have elected to eliminate the purchase of internal combustion engines. You can see a highlight there. In 2035, Canberra has elected to no longer allow the sale of new combustion engine vehicles. And a lot of other countries as well are following suit. As well as the countries that are doing this, also a lot of the major OEMs are also following the same trend, and a lot of them have made commitments to increase their supply of electric or zero emissions vehicles, or completely eliminate internal combustion engines by a certain date as well. Obviously, we saw recently a announcement from Volvo saying from 2026, the Australian market will only be supplied new zero emissions vehicles, which is great to hear. So what does that mean for Australian consumers, and are they likely to switch to an electric or decarbonised vehicle as their next option? Some insights here provided by the Electric Vehicle Council, and that kind of demonstrates to us that we're expecting a lot of people to consider their next vehicle purchase to be an electric vehicle. One of the insights I wasn't so sure about over on this side, the 40% of respondents would be encouraged to purchase an electric vehicle if government subsidies were able to assist with the initial purchase cost. Now, I don't know how that question was phrased, but I'm pretty sure it should be a lot higher than 40%, because that's absolutely something that I would appreciate. So what is the problem? The problem is greenhouse gas emissions. There's obviously particulate matter as well, which is something that has to be taken into account. But we've identified, or we're conscious now of the impact of greenhouse gases, and we're using that as the benchmark to work towards decarbonising. So looking at where the highest pollution is and what work we need to do in what sectors in order to reduce those emissions. So this is a linked from the Net Zero Emissions dashboard on the SEED portal, and if you haven't used it, I'd encourage everyone that's interested in this space to have a look, and it provides some really useful information. So this chart in particular is a breakdown of all of the transport emissions from 1990 projected out to 2050. So some caveats on the projection side of this. We don't know what's going to happen, I think it's safe to say, and since this model was developed, obviously there's been a change in Commonwealth government, and they've come forward with some attractive incentives to further increase the uptake of electrified transport. So there's a good chance that, that we could see an accelerated uptake. So we can see from the 1990 levels that we've had a steady increase in emissions pretty much broadly across all of the transport sectors. We can see a reduction here in emissions due to COVID. Personally, I was surprised that wasn't a much deeper reduction, but this is what the data was telling us. So while I was spending a lot of time at home, there were a lot of people still driving around. And one of the troubling things to be aware of as well is that the transport sector is expecting to increase emissions over the next 4 years before we're expected to see an ongoing decline. And the other thing to take note of here is, even with this modelling and the interventions that we're making, we're still not meeting a net zero target at 2050. So what is the New South Wales government doing? The response to this has been pretty broad. So there's work going on from the Treasurer's Office, which includes the Office for Energy and Climate Change, who are working towards the decarbonisation of the transport fleet, and also providing a number of grant schemes to different companies to support the introduction of electric vehicle charging stations throughout New South Wales. Transport for New South Wales are also working in the same space and collaborating closely, and we're all obviously as well collaborating with the Commonwealth and other states to make sure that anything that we do can be interoperable throughout Australia, not just state by state. So the Future Transport Strategy is a recently released strategy, which I hope everyone's had the opportunity to have a look at. If you're interested in this space, there's a link in the at the bottom. And this highlights a few different actions required by the New South Wales government towards net zero, resilience, environmental sustainability, smarter places, and improving places. And I think one of the important takeaways from the future transport strategy is it recognises the need for modal shift. So if we simply change out every single combustion engine vehicle for an electric vehicle, we will absolutely make an impact, but it's not going to be the impact that we need to meet our sustainability targets. So what we need is a modal shift, and that's encouraging more people, especially those short distance trips, to take active transport options, so walking, scootering, cycling, or public transport. So that's a big shift in focus. So taking a look at the greenhouse gases in the transport sector. So the first line we can see here on the left is the energy production, or the total emissions from stationary energy, transport and other, which is often, could be mining, could be agriculture, so on and so forth. And we're going to focus on this 19%. So cars and light commercials make up 62%, which actually is around just under 12% of the total emissions in New South Wales. This includes medium and heavy trucks, 20%, aviation and shipping, 12%, and the transport for New South Wales, 6%. So you may have seen as well, there has been some announcements around an action plan for electrifying the bus fleet, which is currently getting underway. The STA portion, of course, has moved out of there now into a private bus operation. New South Wales trains, there's a number of solutions that they're looking at for that. Sydney Trains has already decarbonised, so 100% of the energy used now for Sydney, Greater Sydney Trains, the electrified network, is sourced from renewable sources through offsets. So that's already changed and already sort of improved transport's impact. What my team work on in particular is the acceleration of the electrification of passenger and light commercial vehicles. So we've got our own fleet targets, which work towards the early purchase of different types of light and light commercial vehicles, with the intent that those vehicles will soon be available on the second-hand market to stimulate broad market change towards electrification. The zero emission buses, which I just mentioned, the transition plan is available. The link is again at the bottom, and that identifies here the three regions and priorities that Transport have made. So Greater Sydney by 2035, outer metro regions 2040, and regional New South Wales by 2047. And it's important to note that these are the last dates, not the start date. So all of these regions are going to be starting to look at the transition a lot sooner than that. In particular, for electric vehicles, this is I know it's a dense page, but you can see there's a lot going on. So the New South Wales government is committed to $633 million, which is a huge commitment towards the transition to electric vehicles. That includes $149 million for ultra-fast charging infrastructure, which you may have noticed the first round of that has been concluded. $40 million of grants have been awarded, and that will provide New South Wales 89 fast charging stations throughout the state. The second round will be starting soon, so yeah, we're hoping to see a lot more success from that program. There's also 20 million committed towards the destination charging program. So this is destination chargers, which we consider to be level 2 or 3, so anywhere between 7 and 22 kilowatts, and they're being located at restaurants, hotels, and attractions throughout New South Wales. And the idea is when you get to your destination and you park your car for a longer duration than say 3 to 4 hours, then that's your opportunity to charge there. There is also a 20 million fund towards electric vehicle charging in transport assets and at commuter car parks, which is currently in planning. There's $10 million towards a curbside charging program, providing on-street charging in residential streets where private off-street parking is limited. That's obviously a really important one for a lot of people that live in the city areas. A 10 million fund to co-fund 125 medium and large apartment buildings. So that's working out the Australian Building Code and supporting strata apartment owners towards electrified options. There's also a number of rebates, such as cash rebates for eligible EVs. and also a stamp duty waiver for vehicles under 78,000. The other thing which just recently got extended is EVs of single occupancy can travel in transit 2 and transit 3 lanes for another 11.5 months. So that's another sweetener for EV owners at the moment. So we will have a look at what energy and distribution means for EVs. So there are a few words in the electric vehicle strategy which outline the interest that we have in this space and the commitment we also have to make sure that the introduction of electric vehicles does not compromise the current grid, actually works to support it, including integration with rooftop solar, battery storage, and smart chargers. And that's what we're going to have a quick look at now. So here is another chart. This is the national energy market, which incorporates South Australia, Victoria, New South Wales, and Queensland and energy use. So we've got terawatt hours on the left from 0 to 200, and then we've got the years from 210 to 250 on the bottom axis. The blue is what's already happened, so that's fact. And as you can see, we've actually had a reduction in energy requirements over the last 10 years. So that's already good to note. And the other interesting thing with that reduction means that actually we already had the infrastructure over 10 years ago that will support the requirements for increased energy demand brought on by electric vehicles for the next foreseeable future. So if we break down what we're looking at here in terms of energy use, there's losses, there's business, which is commercial and residential, and then there's residential, the light grey, and then finally the impact of electric vehicle charging has been added on top. And as you can see, by 2030, it's still a very small impact. 2035, a small impact, and by 2050, we're expecting electric vehicles demand to match residential demand. So they're going to be closely aligned. So looking at energy use aggregated is interesting, but actually what's more important is how is energy used during peak times. Because of the relatively low uptake of EVs in Australia compared to other countries, it's interesting for us to have a look at what's happening in other countries such as Norway and consider how different they have approached the charging question. So if we have a look at the chart on the left, it tells us the vast majority of people are using regular household sockets to charge their EV. So that means an uncontrolled load in most cases, which means that when they plug the vehicle in, it will start charging. There are a number of vehicles which can manage their own charging. So they can be programmed to charge when the owner or sometimes the energy provider has allocated, but the vast majority of these, I would assume, would be uncontrolled charging. And then we come and see the smart, installed dedicated charging units, so anywhere between 2.4 to 7 kilowatt generally in homes. And then further types of chargers that they use in Norway. And then we can see here on the time of day use and the different types of charger when they're impacting the network. And the vast majority of charging is currently happening in those what we would call current peak hours. And that's probably where the issue is for us, is because we don't have an energy problem. We don't have a transmission problem. We've got a peak problem. So if we can move more of this energy away from peak times, then there's plenty of spare capacity in both the network and the generation. Let's have a look locally what that looks like. So I would say this is a typical day, but since, I don't know, for about 6 months, there's been no such thing as a typical day on the NEM. So this dashboard shows us the green line, which is the demand in megawatts throughout the day. And then also the purple line, which is the spot market price for energy throughout the day. And as you can see, those are quite reasonably well aligned. The interesting thing with electric vehicles is for most people, so this is an estimate, don't hold me to it, 90% of vehicles will spend 90% of their time parked. And if those parked vehicles could be plugged in and the charging could be controlled, then we have an opportunity to make better use of the infrastructure during times of low demand, or potentially high renewable generation, which is generally the same time, and then also to reduce the demand, the additional demand of EVs during those peak periods when both the infrastructure is being challenged and also the prices are getting high. So that's attractive both for the distribution network, the energy generators, and the retailers. So how can we do that practically from an EV perspective? So these are just a few features I've listed down the left-hand side. Some of them are possible to get on multiple chargers. So perhaps you can get some high-tech chargers that will cover all of these needs in one go, but I've just broken them down into some specific features that could be interesting. So the first thing is scheduled charging. For most people, they could put a timer on that meets the amperage requirements that they need and has been approved by an electrician, hopefully. But that this can manage to make sure that they're not charging during peak energy and peak network charge times. So that's a very simple thing that people can do. And that's, as we already mentioned, that can be managed by the vehicle as well. There's also optimized charging, where you can have a smarter charger, which will allow either a third party to manage, or you can program the system yourself to allow for charging to occur during times when perhaps if you've got rooftop solar at home, you can charge your EV at home, so greatly reducing any demand on the network. There's also the potential for ADR, which is an automated demand response, allowing the EV to charge, like we said in the previous slide, at times of low network demand, high energy production. Vehicle to home is already available from a number of vehicles. It's not as easy as it looks. It's pretty much plugging in a power board to your vehicle, but it means that you can power some things from your home for a period. It's certainly something that we're expecting to be attractive into the future, but at the moment, broadly, it's not available, as is vehicle to grid, which will obviously be very attractive to support the network when you have potentially a vehicle fleet that has as much energy storage as Snowy Hydro 2, which I believe will be around 2050. The next thing is automated billing. So what if you've got a work car that you're charging at home? It's much more convenient to charge at home. You may not want to pay for the employer's fuel. So some smart chargers can already, with pattern approved meters, isolate the charging required for the work vehicle and then bill that directly back to your employer. And then finally, just real-time information. So a lot of people that are working in this space or have an interest in this appreciate that being able to know exactly what's going on with the vehicle. That brings me to the end, and the questions are going to be saved for the end of the presentation. But if you'd like to drop them into the chat and the Q&A, we'll gladly pick them up on the end. And now I'm going to hand over to Chika. Thank you.
Thanks, Tim. It was a really great overview of what you guys are doing in New South Wales and what the impacts are going to be on the electricity sector as well. I'd just like to introduce Greg Hannon. Greg, again, is the head of network strategy and non-network solutions for 3 distribution companies in Victoria: City Power, Powercor, and United Energy. So Greg, over to you.
Yeah, look, thanks very much, Rachika, and yeah, great presentation, Tim. I think I agree with most of it. In fact, all of it. I think you covered a lot of ground there, so well done. So look, I'll just give a brief introduction, and I was asked to join the panel. I was pleased to do so, to give an industry perspective. So as Rachika said, we're a distributor in Melbourne and Victoria. We're 3 of the 5, and basically the coverage is by I guess area is about half the state. And we've got 2 million customers, so we're quite large, and our networks cover, rural and remote areas in the western part of Victoria, all the way in towards the city and going around to the Mornington Peninsula, for those of you familiar with that part of the world. And so, as a distributor, like we're quite positive about enabling the energy transition, first and foremost, but in particular, all forms of DR. And it's very clear that electric vehicles are but one form of DR, and obviously the one that's the most prolific at the moment is rooftop solar. But when you start to think about the issues related to rooftop solar, batteries, and electric vehicles, there are a lot of similarities. So let me just share my slides. So there we go. That should come through. Yeah, so I just wanted to kind of give some perspectives about how we see the world. So, I mean, you know, we've done a lot of analysis on this, so my slides are very high level. But, you know, I was also lucky enough to go to Norway earlier in the year, and I saw, you know, their level of uptake, which is, you know, phenomenal, and it's been quite rapid. But there are some big differences, and I think Tim highlighted that with the peak demand issue. And, you know, one of the things that we have here is, you know, we have very high demand for use of the network during summer periods and in the evening. Whereas in places like Norway, they rely on their electricity network in particular for very, very large heating demand. And in many cases, they have multi-phase and three-phase connections to the home. So a much stronger grid in a way, but different sort of set of characteristics of their energy system. So, you know, what we're kind of looking at is a range of things, but, you know, aligned to some of the comments that Tim made. You know, we see EVs coming. We know their uptake is quite small at the moment. I think in Victoria there's about 12,000. And the other interesting thing is that, you know, when we look at the emissions targets that have been set, so net zero by 2050, and even the Victorian government set a new car sales target of 50% EVs by 2030. You know, we just see that the rate of growth at the moment is nowhere near the level of policy aspiration. And so I guess our view is that, you know, if those targets are binding, which we believe they will be, then, you know, we're expecting to see much more, or many more EVs, and to be honest, probably even stronger policy stimulus coming down the line, both state and federal. So that's, I guess, the first point. So then in terms of like, what do we need to do now to get ready for that? So, you know, as networks, we typically, you know, run assets that last for up to 50, 60 years. So we're always looking ahead. Part of my job is to sort of look over the horizon and out to the next 20 years and see what's coming. And so what we've done is developed a sort of a plan within our business for, you know, what we need to do now to get ready for EVs, and how do we make sure that we enable their gradual introduction to the system. So just got some summary of what, you know, some obvious things here, but I'll just quickly run through those. But, you know, first of all, we need to understand what customers want and need in this space. So, you know, we heard that earlier that EVs are typically at home, or all vehicles rather, passenger vehicles are at home most of the time, not really doing anything. So, you know, that's fortunate. So that may be mean that, you know, the demand is not, it's sort of, it occurs at certain periods of the day. But, you know, we need to understand what customers, you know, want. Do they want just the ability to charge whenever they like? Do they want someone potentially to control the charging for them and optimize it, just make sure the battery's full when they need their car? And I guess, you know, it's still early days on that front. So that's the first thing. We need to understand that. You know, we still, as I mentioned, see that the uptake is going to be modest initially. But, you know, we do see that like by around the mid-2030s, that if the 2050 net zero target is binding, which there's no indication it won't be, then, you know, policies like the, you know, the banning of new internal combustion engine sales have to kick in. And, you know, it's really interesting because, you know, if you buy a car today, you're sort of looking at a 10 or 12 year period of time. So, you know, everyone who says, oh, my next car is going to be an EV, they're probably right. It just might be the next one or the one after that will be an EV. So again, there's time for this for us, from our perspective, but we've got to get ready. So one of the big issues, obviously, from a network point of view, is the load, not just the energy, but the demand. And so we need to understand what that's going to look like. So we're already starting to do analysis on the network to understand the locational impacts, where will we expect to see impacts, and it'll vary by, I guess, our networks, but it'll vary by suburbs and different demographics. So, you know, like I guess the early hypothesis remains that, you know, more affluent suburbs will be early adopters more so than less affluent suburbs. But I guess, you know, we'll wait and see how it happens. But, you know, fundamentally, we just need to make sure we understand what that uptake is going to look like, because it probably won't be uniform. And then just make sure that you know, if we see any particular issues in a particular area, you know, what that means. And when you think about how the charging is going to be done, there will be a variety of models. There'll be fast charging, there'll be, you know, car park charging, shopping centres and things like that. But there'll also be, quite a significant amount of just at home charging. So it'll be interesting to see whether customers want fast chargers or they're just happy to have the standard wall outlet and just let the battery charge slowly. But then if you're not using your car very much during the day, and it's, sitting idle over 90% of the time, then, that's probably fine, because if you're just going to pick up the kids and go to the shops during the week or working from home, that's probably going to be an efficient solution. So the fourth item there is, this issue that Tim mentioned about the peak. So, what drives investment in distribution networks is peak demand, because, we need to make sure at the highest demand point that, the lights stay on. And so if the peak is compounded by new EV loads, then, that will drive further investment. But because there's significant capacity in the network outside of the peak, we'll be looking for a variety of ways to shift that load. So they include things like tariffs, direct load control, aggregators, no doubt, and retailers will be playing a role here. And we could even see, the EVs being treated like a battery and being used to soak up excess solar energy during the middle of the day. So, but fundamentally, that's critical for an efficient and affordable rollout for everyone, because what we don't want to see is basically the peak just compounded unnecessarily. And so then, what do we need to do now? We need to basically, make sure our systems are robust and fit for purpose. So, expect to see large volumes of EV connections coming through, chargers in apartments and things like that. And, there's really, the processes for those are not really even established. I've heard a lot of anecdotes from people trying to get chargers into apartments, and, the buildings were never envisaged this. So it's not a straightforward thing. So, we're really good at connecting customers. So we're going to need to be really good at connecting customers with EVs or EV chargers and charge points to our network. So there's a lot of focus on that, and even just defining the process, what is it? But also one of the big things that's coming from the sort of EV charge point operators, very similar to people who want to put in batteries, is, tell us where we should put our EVs. So, having maps that show the hosting capacity of the network is one of the critical areas that I know that sector's looking for. So, we can provide that information, we can get our processes right, then, we'll be able to facilitate EV connections. And, we don't want to be a barrier, we just want to be an enabler. And the other last point is, because, we see the growth ahead of us in particular, there's time now to influence and argue for settings with regulators and policymakers about, what good looks like. So with things like, solar panels, we saw really aggressive volume stimulus over the last 10, 15 years. And some of that volume stimulus was ahead of sort of the awareness of some of the integration issues. So now with, for example, rooftop solar, we mandate certain inverter settings so that, the voltage can be managed. And there's a significant effort to make sure that what goes onto the network is not going to cause further problems. And that's probably the same thing for EVs. We just want to, if people are going to connect, we'll probably have a view as to, what you shouldn't do. We probably won't mandate things, but, there'll be certain, for example, most likely communication protocols that will be involved. How you connect and all these other, I guess, things that we can feed into the overall discussion to make sure that when it happens at scale, that it happens efficiently and smoothly. So that's a big part of it. So, really, to summarize, we are planning for EV demand growth. We expect that to happen. We see that, see that happening really over the next decade. And I guess we would expect to see it ramp up year on year. We want to be enablers. We want to make sure there's efficient charging, for all segments. And depending on who you talk to, you might see the fleet sector moving faster than the passenger sector or the bus sector. But in any case, if they're all going to decarbonise, they all need to move to much more electrification. We see the electric vehicles as a form of distributed energy resource. In a way, the batteries that are in them are quite large, so they're almost 10 times larger than, say, a battery you might have on your wall at the moment if you've got solar and battery. So they're about 100 kilowatt hours. Tesla Powerwall is about 10 kilowatt hours. So they're quite large. And even there, we're wanting to understand, how will customers want to use that? Will they want to feed back into the grid, or will they want to feedback into their home. And then lastly, it's just about making sure that the work that we do, we feed it into the regulators and policymakers, so that, you know, there is an efficient and, you know, ideally seamless rollout in this transition. And yeah, that's sort of the way we see it. So really exciting journey that we're all on. Really happy to be on the panel. I know it's only a brief update, but yeah, like I think we're all kind of working on this, and I think you know, what I'm certainly seeing is a lot of momentum going forward, and yeah, happy to share that, you know, our business is doing a lot of planning to make sure that we are the enablers, and that this happens, and it does, and it happens well in Victoria. So I will wrap it up there, because I know we're got a fair bit to get through.
Thanks a lot, Greg. Great presentation as well, to give us perspective on how the networks who manage the low voltage parts of our electricity grid are looking to make this transition, you know, as smooth as possible. I'd just like to invite Ollie and Tim and Leanne and Madi to unmute. We're going to take some questions from the audience, and we've got some great ones that have come through. One of the first questions, though, I'd just like to pose to Greg and to Tim specifically are, you know, there's strategies, there are operational strategies for each of your organizations. And Tim, you know, you took us through the New South Wales government strategy. From a transportation perspective, and then likewise from an electricity perspective, you know, Greg, you mentioned that the networks manage their investment to manage to peak demand, right? Their investment is to try to address that, make sure that there's a level of reliability there. Tim, what's the comparable sort of Department of Transportation or transportation objective when you look at your investment strategy? Is it this climate objective that's the priority, or is it the mobility objective of, you know, ensuring people can get from point A to point B? If you can walk us through some of that from your perspective, and then Greg, likewise, in addition to the management of the peak demand, if you can talk a little bit about the prime objectives for electricity, that would be really helpful.
So from my understanding, our prime objective is the decarbonisation. So it's the environmental targets that we've signed up to, both nationally and as a state. But obviously, we also want to ensure that transportation is essential throughout New South Wales, continue to take place as people are familiar with it. I think what I said before, the future mobility strategy probably highlights this, whereas we can make a one-for-one change from combustion engines to electric vehicles, but the best outcome will come from reducing the amount of combustion engine trips or vehicle trips altogether, encouraging and increasing the uptake of active transport options, and the modal shift towards public transport as well. So I'll pass over to Greg at that point. Thank you.
Yeah, so thanks, Ruchika, and thanks, Tim. So, you know, basically the traditional role of a distributor was to take the energy, you know, to the home and the business, right? And we did that safe, affordably, and reliably. And that fundamentally doesn't change. But with the transition and with the greater, well, with the energy system becoming far more distributed, so you're going from, let's say, 100 power stations to 1 million power stations, right? They're much smaller and they're fully distributed. So what we now see is two-way flows of energy and power all the way through our network. So we need to manage for import, which is basically the energy that comes to the customer. And, you know, the biggest trigger for investment is the peak demand, because when the peak it was forecast to go above what the network can handle, then we need to reinforce the network. But increasingly with solar and batteries, and EVs are a basic battery on wheels, you know, customers are wanting to export their energy as well when it's surplus to their requirements. And so, you know, our new role and emerging role, which we're now doing, but we will continue to do much more, is to enable that customer DER. And just to put it in context, I think our total peak demand is something where, if you added up our three networks, it's 7 to 8 gigawatts. And the total generation we have connected is about 3.3 gigawatts. So, and that's, you know, growing by the year. So not even in 2020, it was in about 2 gigawatts. So it's continuing to grow. So we need to manage the two-way flow. We need to enable the export. And, you know, we would see in the future that EVs will play a role there too. First of all, to soak up energy that's surplus, but potentially even to feed back into the grid.
Great. thanks. This next question is from the audience, and I think it's specifically directed to Tim. I think this person just wanted to know what the government is doing around equity for the purchase of EVs. So the secondhand EV market doesn't, currently exist, and ownership of EV is a little bit outside of, achievable for several. Is there any specific strategy to reduce that cost or to affect making that a bit more equitable?
Yep. So in New South Wales, we have a number of levers that are available to us. One is the upfront price, the sticker price for the vehicle, and that's vehicles below a threshold are provided $3,000 rebate and also an exemption from stamp duty. So that's already bringing down the upfront cost for a vehicle to improve the equitability. But I recognise as well, a lot of EVs currently available on the market are at the mid to high range. One of the key levers as well is the procurement of our fleet and the fleet that we oversee. So we are by 2025 purchasing 50% of electric or decarbonised vehicles. By 2030, it will be 100%, which means that after 3 to 4 years, those vehicles will be coming onto the second-hand market. We recognise at the moment as well that the second market isn't flooded with electric vehicles, but over time that uptake will increase. We've also offered support to fleet operators. So any company or council that operates fleets of 10 or more vehicles, they can go into a reverse auction process, which will give them the opportunity to bid for a grant scheme to reduce the cost of the transition to those vehicles. So it's not only the government fleet that's going to be turning over the electric fleet into the future, it's also the the councils and businesses, and we are supporting that. The big lever as well, I think, is what you will have heard from the NEVS strategy engagement around the fuel efficiency standards, which will encourage automakers that sell into Australia to bring more lighter, fuel efficient and ideally cheaper electric vehicles into this market that are already currently available in Europe and other markets. Hopefully that helps.
No, so it sounds like there are lots of different independent and collaborative type initiatives that are helping with that cost burden. This next one, I might rephrase slightly, but I just wanted to know, so what sort of integrated planning would be at the nexus of transport and energy to ensure that we can start to optimize and orchestrate some of the systemic impacts as we transition to EVs? So, localized EV charging at depots, distributed energy resources, how do we optimize the use of local roof space for solar PV and electrification to support this transition?
I might have a stab at that one, Ruchika. So at the kind of system level, what we're already starting to see with AEMO is, they're starting to, focus more on what's happening at the distribution level, just because there's so much DR there. And, we saw a little bit of focus on that in the last ISP, but we're really expecting that to be enhanced in the next one in 2024. And, the businesses like ours and others are feeding into that. And so I think that's one aspect. And then I think, goes to the other point I made about, where should EVs go? Like there's a lot of desire to sort of understand where best to place them. But then I think across each sector, there are people that are, looking at how can you take advantage of existing infrastructure and, put in EV charging infrastructure. So the obvious one is petrol stations, major transport routes and places where there are lots of cars. So shopping centres and the like.
Thanks, Greg. I've got one for Tim. So it's great to see the range of initiatives being pursued. How would you characterize your degree and probably more broadly the Department of Transportation's understanding of the impact of the electrification of transport on the electricity system, and what could be done to help, further bridge any gaps in that understanding or mitigating the impact? And potentially, where would you like to see academic research support what it is that you're trying to accomplish?
Yeah, thanks for the question. So we are already working with ARENA programs that are leading the distributed energy integration program, which I believe there are a number of research institutions already represented. And that is an opportunity for transport and energy to come together. And I think, you know, the introduction of electric vehicles is something actually that's pretty well known. We've already got rooftop solar as distributed energy resource. We've already got battery storage at homes, and EVs are an extension to that. The bigger challenge on the energy side is moving away from baseload power to renewable and intermittent energy generation. And I think the opportunity there is that EVs can soak up a lot of that intermittent power, and then they can stop charging and reduce their load when that's not available as well. So I think, yeah, the opportunities for the introduction of EVs to support the transition to renewable energy is a great opportunity, and we're absolutely working with the energy sector to make sure we can make the most of that.
Yeah, just maybe throwing it to Madi and Ali as well. You know, where do you see opportunities for researchers to support in this transition? You know, I think, Tim, it sounds like, you know, you've got a lot of contacts and you're working really collaboratively with the electricity sector. You know, yeah, Madi and Ali, I'd love to hear about your perspective on that.
Yeah, thanks, Chika. I think there is huge opportunity for researchers. This is pretty new to co-plan these transport and electricity sector. They need to be co-planned when we have electric vehicles. It has some threats like peak demand in the electricity sector, but some good opportunities for V2G enabled vehicles. But we know that V2G is not yet enabled in many cars. So I guess there needs to be some good collaboration with manufacturers as well. They want to see what is going to be their role in this energy market, and then deciding on whether or not to enable V2G, and if enabled, how to enable that kind of things. But I think from research point of view, there is very interesting research elements that we can work on that. But the main thing is data. I know that C4Net has started creating a data hub. We need data. As researchers, we need data from both transport sector and energy sector, and preferably from electric vehicles. We need to understand more on the electric vehicle charging profile, both in the public transport sector, buses, and in private sector. What sort of charging behaviors people are doing. I don't think that there's going to be more change in the travel behavior. At the end of the day, is vehicles, so they are going to use it for their travel. But the charging pattern is very important. If you have good data on that, I think the research community can work on that. It has started with C4Net's work, of course, but we need to do more on that and more data availability to researchers. I think that will stimulate the research community.
That's great.
And,
Thank you.
if I want to add something, Ruchika, to what Maddie mentioned, I think if I want to rephrase what Tim and Greg said about the let's say smartness inside the distribution grid, we need to increase the level of smartness. And as Tim mentioned, we need to automate the processes. We need to let's say implement smart EV charging algorithms, smart load shifting, and implementing these smart algorithms requires a lot of research in order to make sure that they can be integrated in the available power distribution grid that we have. So as Maddie mentioned, we require a lot of data to validate the performance of these smart algorithms.
That's great. Thank you, both of you. I'm sort of combining questions. We've got a ton of great questions in here, so I'm going to see if I can't try to be a little bit efficient. So we've got a question about for Greg about how you've done some of the modeling and some of the factoring on the impact of electric vehicle demand. One, how have you made that how have you established that critical priority for EVs, and have you factored in other sort of transportation modal requirements? So, you know, Tim's presentation showed big demand and big needs for shifting to more carbon neutral mode of transportation in specifically aviation and shipping. Is that something that the DNSPs are taking into account, or how are you doing some of your critical prioritization in that?
Yeah, thanks, Ruchika. So we haven't gone that far yet, but I guess the context I should have mentioned is that decarbonisation means that there's a lot more electricity required for everything. And so we're looking at the broader topic of electrification, and obviously electrification of transport sits within that. So we've done just recently some, really detailed modelling on the impacts of more substitution of residential gas and what that would look like. We developed some good models about how to actually reflect changing load profiles, and then understand the impact all the way down to different asset classes. So that's one thing we've done. But going forward, we have to do that piece of work and then consider EVs in different segments, whether they're large scale freight or the passenger sector, and then actually look at the combined impact of all of these electrification trends in combination. And so, as you would know, like, that's some work that we're starting to plan and do with C4net, and it's something that we're going to have to do for our various sort of regulatory proposals. It's something that AEMO will need to understand for their own integrated system planning, and it's really kind of what's going to be all of us are going to be working on for a long time. So I think that's the approach, and I think the only way you can do it is to sort of have a range of scenarios, as levels of electrification across different segments, but also you also need to have a methodology to understand the different uptakes across different geographies, because as I said earlier, it won't be uniform. So that's kind of what's ahead of us, and that's what we're really starting to do. And so we'll be continuing to do a lot of that more detailed modelling next year, specifically for EVs.
Yeah, that's great. I think I might just touch on, what you mentioned there in terms of the requirements of the regulatory proposal. And I want to make sure that that's clear for people that are on the call, and then also ask Tim for his perspective on that. So investment cycles, which effectively determine how distribution companies then spend their capital to build up their infrastructure, are determined on 5-year cycles, right? So I know that the DNSPs are working on putting together these methodologies and doing modeling so they can submit, this is the kind of money that we would like to spend to get the kind of outcomes that we need as a society, right? And then it's assessed by the appropriate regulatory bodies. Tim, is there something similar that occurs for the DOT, and or do you have timeline cycles that are really critical for both sectors to understand when we talk about planning? And the reason why this is important is, there might be a policy discussion or decision that comes down that has really great implications for society, but the infrastructure providers don't have the capital or the OpEx to actually expend into that policy without some serious expense traveling through to the consumer.
Yep. So thanks for the question, and I think probably we have been collaborating as well with our local DNSPs, so the 3 that operate in New South Wales, and they generally do come to us before they go through their planning cycles to look at both short-term and long-term investment planning in this space. And we absolutely share the information that we have available to us with them to make sure that they can plan as effectively as possible. I think it's probably worth highlighting, like going back to what I shared in the presentation, was most people in other countries are just using the plug socket to charge their car over a long duration. So that's a load of 1.8 to 2.4 kilowatts. That's akin to someone boiling a kettle at their house. So boiling a kettle might be for 8 or 10 hours, but you can imagine just thinking about it like that, we've got a fair bit of kettles that we can boil simultaneously before we need to make significant investment.
Yeah, and kettles are the highest demand items in your home in a lot of places. So when you do flick on that kettle, that's what's causing spikes in demand. So it's a good analogy. I might pass it over. Thanks again for your questions. We don't have time to answer them all right now. However, we will take them down, and we do have a website specifically for this Conductor series where we'll try to address some more of those questions that you've asked and provide additional resources on both electricity and transportation so that we can start this dialogue. But I'd like to hand it over to Ali right now just to discuss a survey that extends upon some of the questions that you might have.
Yeah, thank you very much, Rashika. Yeah, as you mentioned, this event is the first of a series that is going to happen. And in parallel with this series, we are working on developing a position paper on the electrification of transportation with the focus on buses that is now happening in different states. So the idea is electrification of buses is the point where transport and energy people should work collaboratively in order to solve the issues because of the high demand that we have there. And the idea of this position paper is to bring different challenges and different ideas from different perspectives, from transport, from energy, and from the other parties, and just recommend, let's say, unique framework which is acceptable for all parties to go ahead. And in this position paper, we want to, let's say, go through what we know from literature and from the international practices that we have, and also provide a research roadmap for what we don't know, and wrap it up in the form of a position paper. So the strategy that we are using is to, let's say, going through the literature and the practice review, and also going through the discussions with the experts in the field. Guys who are available in the in this meeting are on top priority. So if you are interested to do that, to help us in this way, just please fill the form that is now in the chat box. And in that, if you enter your email address, we'll contact you and just we'll ask you for a 20 to 30 minutes, let's say, not webinar, let's say online meeting, sorry. And we'll discuss about the issues that we have. So the idea is to prepare the first draft of this position paper, circulate it among the experts in industry, and then based on the comment and the suggestions, we'll revise it, and then hopefully we'll have something that all parties agreed on that and can be considered as a base for the next step. Yeah, that's all, and thank you very much.
Thank you so much, everyone. We're just about bang on time, and I know we've got some hard stops at 1:30. I just want to thank all of the panelists again, Greg, Tim, Ali, Madi, and Leanne. Thank you, iMove, for helping coordinate this, and RMIT for helping with the consortium. It's been a really healthy first discussion, and we look forward to building on this and seeing how we can actually sort of build on the collaboration that they're doing in New South Wales, across the country, and possibly even nationally, so and internationally. So thank you again to everyone, and we look forward to continuing the conversation.
Thank you.
Thanks, everyone.
Thanks for having us.
Bye.
Bye.
Thanks, everyone.